Welcome to our monthly Heart Warrior webinar, where we get together and reflect on what is going on inside of us, perhaps also how the energy work that we are doing, the truth training that we're doing together here, how this is affecting us, maybe changes, insights, and so forth. So it's just the opportunity to share for all of us here. Thank you for coming. And this is a bit of a new tradition here, but since our Heart Warrior meets are often right after our end of the month marathons, I also want to take the opportunity here to reflect on the marathon that ended last night, not even, well, like what this is now 15 hours ago. Yeah, we had a beautiful last session last night, the 9th session. Personally, for me, just to break the ice here, this marathon was a beautiful reminder of this internalized inner self, higher self, or true self, soul self, depending on how you feel this. But it was a beautiful reminder of this. Due to our schedules here, Jeff usually does the first sessions of the day, and on the first day, he typically does the first and second session. And it's very interesting for me to watch this because even though, I write the instructions, I create the form link and send out, do all the administration of it. When Jeff starts the marathon, these first sessions, right? So I basically come in the night of the first day. The marathon has already progressed, and even though I'm typically busy with coaching sessions, I can feel the energy of whatever the marathon is about so clearly that the moment I enter the third session, and this is perhaps the case for many of you too, because many of you have to work during marathons, and I come in and at the end of the day, and all that is coming forward in the session has already been playing out in my day. My energy is responding to it, even if I'm not in the sessions. Do you guys, did any one of you have this as well? I mean, I see you guys here. I know Cheryl, Denise, you were there pretty much in every session that we had as co-facilitators. But did any one of you had a similar feeling, like coming in later and yet realizing that some of these experiences that were reported, that these were things that were going on sort of in the background, regardless of whether you were in the session or not? This is something I want to repeat here for the active heart warriors. This is a privilege that you have. I mean, when we do marathons, they're 72 hours long, and many of you do this already. It's good inner guidance to just do your own transmissions in between if you have to work or if you have a 3D schedule. The whole point about or the whole point of marathons and integrating it into our 3D life is about finding this self-motivated, self-responsible place in us that connects us with, whatever the energies are that we are working with. I mean, many of you have this experience where you feel the energy of a session come in before it even happens, right? Do you guys know what I mean? That's normal for many of you already, because it's typically like right when the instructions are being sent out, when the field begins to form. And so the energies that are being worked with in sessions, they come in prior to the actual energy sessions. So I just want to repeat this here for all new heart warriors, that especially with marathons, it's not really bound to the session time. We carry your energy with, unless you let us know that you don't want to be in that particular session at that particular time because you say you're engaging with something else, or you don't, you don't trust that you can handle it at the time. But for the most part, for you as hardware, it's important to see that it's not the sessions themselves, but your commitment to yourself that makes this energy unfold in you and allows you to work with insight. insight is the inner experience. So let's reflect on the Grace Manifestation Marathon a bit. Jeff is here next to me.
Hey, everybody.
Jeff, how did the Grace Manifestation Marathon work for you? Not just the sessions, the whole entire 3 days, 72-hour time.
Well, I think the cool thing about most marathons is it starts out with pretty strong resistance and then it slowly shifts as you keep working it. But this one, the big thing that we could be felt, at least on my end, was how strong the heart space became, that connection, through the constant work each day, even though the first day was the focus of heart space, just that continuous work till the last day of the master cell. Usually the first day of each session is a bit rough because that's normal because we're getting into a new session and people are a little bit uncomfortable, they don't quite remember it, or they're
and
new
the
to it.
3D stuff,
Exactly.
The distractions too.
Yeah, all the dramas. But it was really beautiful to watch each day how the transition out of the resistance, for the most part, in most people, shifted. The other thing that happened either the second or the third day was that some of the heart warriors have been in this group for some time, and some people that are new were struggling here and there. And all we had to kind of really remind them was, hey, look, you got this inside of you. And as soon as that remembrance was just mentioned to them, even their energy, it was like they shifted, and there was this beautiful connection that occurred. Typically as the facilitators, we don't do that until, at least I don't, until the second or third day, because you kind of want people to try it on their own and try to remember it. But there was this real beautiful transition that was already occurring, and all we did was kind of just remind people. So it was really, really.
It was so instantaneous in this marathon, wasn't it?
Well, it was either on or off.
Yeah, and it was this back and forth throughout the sessions that we noticed too. But the moment this remembrance came, it activated it right away. Did you guys feel that too? We have silent ninja heart warriors today.
It's okay. Well, even the people that were still struggling, we're not expecting people to let go of everything and be enlightened in a 3-day period. That just doesn't, well, I guess it's certainly possible, but not usual. It's more so about something happens where their energy begins to shift. They either internalize their journey a bit more, or they recognize the beauty within, or they feel the shift. That's the key thing. Like all of a sudden now something's changed. And as that occurs, then there's I think you label them as touchdown moments, even if it's tiny. That's what matters. And that can happen in every session, or at least once a day if you're doing a couple sessions. And those are what really can drive a person to have continued growth, because now they can feel it.
Well, and there was this instant relief. And then there was this instant pain when we went into resistance again, or when we stepped out. It was so instantaneous. I also, I was going to ask you that, Jeff. We didn't have the time to talk about this yet, but in this particular marathon, I felt a very, very strong, I don't want to say need, but I guess, again, probably reminder to work with grace, to work with this surrender piece of grace, where a big part of the theme of this marathon was to reveal what needs to be healed. It was really strong, like to actually see the things that are holding us back, that are blocking us, and then contrasted by the experience when we actually did decide to trust and surrender, how relieving and how expansive that truly is. But it was a very strong sort of gracie energy that I felt in this marathon. Yes, a lot of times, grace is still something like a mental construct for people, or a religious construct. When we work with the resonance of grace, it's really all about trusting in our higher power, and being able to recognize when we have to let go, and when we have to just our inner higher power handle certain things. And the reward, especially for you guys who are training this, is so instantaneous. Also, the manifestation aspect of that, how outer conditions can change within a heartbeat, and just knowing that and learning to trust in that the moment you surrender to your inner higher power, that you will automatically go into expansion. It's not something you have to fight for or you have to force. It's then just there. So it's really the truth that our journey is not a journey of acquiring or getting something or getting better at something. I mean, getting better at surrendering is probably the biggest oxymoron out there. You can't get good at surrendering. That's not what this is about. This is about letting go.
Well, it becomes easier. That might be a better way to describe it.
Yeah, but becoming better, like as
It's
in
not like a
regards to the
competition, right.
performance stuff.
It's just it gets easier because it's a more common pathway.
The more often you do it, the more often you trust in yourself and experience it yourself, the easier it becomes.
Yeah.
Because you then have, I guess, faith or hope in that when you let go, that something shifts for you.
You also have the routine. Like part of the reason why we chose to do marathons, whatever it was a few years ago now, is because we noticed it's the repetition. That repetition of consistently for 3 hours, or even if you do it just 1 hour a day for 3 days, that repetition of whatever the process is, heart space, master cell or the void, it's that repetition, it's the training. Your brain will get used to that. There is a part of the brain that was quite a bit of part of the brain that if you train it, it will follow along. It may still complain and whine as the emotions and some of the defensive structures occur, but it'll keep leaning towards where you're going, and that is vital.
And that's where the dedication and the intention come in. This is also part of the practice in marathons, is to hold the intention. We all like the idea of being more connected with our higher self and being all spiritual and all, but the reality of it is that most of us just dip their toes.
Yeah.
We go in, oh, so beautiful, and then next thing you know, the kids are screaming, or the neighbor is knocking at your door, or you have to do your shopping list, and you're gone. All right. So a big part here of this holding your energy and consciously focusing on the intention of wanting this inner experience is ultimately then what changes our whole nervous system. And that gets supported by repetition, just like muscle training. So for me personally, the big takeaway from this beautiful marathon here was the importance of wanting to internalize what we are experiencing. That this is something that happens through our intention. And with our intention, then our focus shifts, and with our focus shift, our energy shifts, and with our energy shifting, things can unfold, things can expand again.
You're not pressurized anymore. It becomes less and less pressure. And some of you felt that on the facilitation side, and obviously on the participation side, whereas we kept letting things go, it would build and build and build, and then it would loosen. And that's that dedication we keep talking about, the practicality of it.
Cheryl, you wanted to share. Now we talked over you.
No, fine. I really appreciate you putting this into words, because that's exactly how I felt it too. I feel like I've done this marathon a number of times over the years, and I feel that this the very first time that I actually I don't know what word I'm looking for. Very first time that I actually allowed all to happen, if that makes sense. I surrendered into it. And I think that the difference, to put in simplistic terms, was I wasn't trying to do anything this time, because this one really can get to me in a mental way, like an achievement way. I got to get to the void. I don't know what it is, but whatever the projection of the void is, I got to get there, and I got to find the master cell. I don't know what it is, but I know it's in there somewhere. And so both of those things were always the driver, like this achievement doing thing. And this time, without intention, right? Of course, it's to let go, but it's like you'd said earlier, like Grace just took the whole thing over, says, like, I'm conducting this symphony, I don't need your help, and here we go. And that was like, whoa, it just was really open, like really different. I thank you. I really enjoyed this marathon.
Good.
And the instantaneousness of it also was so stunning in its translation in 3D. That was the part here that I noticed in simple words, how with this shift, how everything shifts, how the sensations in my body shift, the outlook on future, the way I perceive myself. And it's something that I want to stress out here as sort of the metaphysical or spiritual backdrop to consciously manifesting. And that is that, when people train their energy and when they learn to focus their energy, which is what all this hard warrior training is about, manifestation happens without proceeds, okay? Which means that you have to be careful what you wish for, because your energy is becoming more focused, and therefore, negative, there's no such thing as a negative manifestation, but a negative thought pattern or a negative feeling towards yourself or negative perception then also manifests much faster. And this is the big deal here, that we go through what many of you often describe as a roller coaster, and the ego resists this. The ego doesn't want it. But really what we are becoming aware of is how these minute shifts in our energy actually create a different reality. And in the end, then, this whole practice is about choosing which reality we want. Okay, so yeah, if my 3D sucks, and if it's unhealthy, or if I'm hanging on to illusions, or if I'm afraid of doing the next step, sure, I can do that. But the pain of that situation then is just going to continue, basically hit my awareness. I won't be able to get myself out of it anymore, because you can't do truth training on one hand and on the other hand, continue projecting into illusions or fantasies. That doesn't work. So the side effect, and this is often reported by veteran hard warriors and also trance coaches of doing this truth training, is that the pain of not being in your own truth also increases. Yeah, it becomes, for some of us, it's a physical pain. I've always experienced that as a physical pain when I'm working against my own truth, because I have so strongly calibrated and anchored myself to its truth that when I work against myself, it hurts. It hurts my body. And that's how I can always tell when I have to stop. So a lot of times there is no one solution, no one sort of fix-it-all solution for these struggles that we are dealing with. But there is a clear understanding in me, that is, that if I keep investing in an illusion, or worse, if I don't even know what I'm focusing or investing my energy into, all right, then I cannot be in charge of my life. I cannot be in charge of my manifestations. Then I must feel helpless and powerless, because I ultimately am. It's the difference between externalized and internalized. Yeah, so an internalized experience, or the experience of our life as internalized, means that we're seeing ourselves as part of this whole co-creation process. And we can only feel that when we are willing to step into that reality, into that one true reality. All other realities that have to do with performance, ideals, perfection, you know, fantasy in regards to like how we want our life or our relationship to be, works against us then. So this is the big disclaimer to truth training, is that we have to be willing to be in truth. All right. If not, that becomes more apparent to us as well. First, maybe more through just inner sensations and energies, and eventually also through our 3D reality. And to have the courage to break through that then comes through your internalized experience. comes through this training, where you know that all you really got to do is let go and surrender to your inner higher power. And that this shift then immediately creates a relief in you. Your energy goes back into expansion. And as a result of that, your 3D perception, how you perceive your life, changes. So it's the courage and the trust in combination with our willingness and our intention to be in truth. That's why I always call conscious manifestation manifesting and living in truth. That's what that is. We all manifest at all times. But what we manifest, that depends on where we send our energy, right? We do well what we dwell on. That is sort of the simplest way of reminding ourselves that if our energy goes into resistance, into denial, into fantasy, performance, doingness, that our reality becomes limited, restricted. And that the more we try to keep it up for whatever the reasons, fear or lack of courage, or, wouldn't it be nice, or not wanting to be taking responsibility for our lives, then we are indeed choosing an externalized life. We are choosing to be victim of circumstances. We are choosing to be dominated by outside, by external factors, sometimes as subtle as what other people think about us, or how other people see us, or how God sees us, or whatever sort of the benchmark is for us. That's the big realization in regards to the conscious manifestation process. Is that for as long as we are externalized, we cannot be in charge and not trust in how we experience things. Because we weren't there. We weren't there when it was basically sort of transformed into 3D.
Hi, Jona.
Hey, Denise.
Hi, I like the timing. Thank you for putting this into words. This is what I have been witnessing the last couple of days. The last day felt pretty challenging for me, more than the first 2 days in the marathon.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it just comes down to that place of being very real, honest,
Mm-hmm.
truth with oneself. This morning I woke up and I went I witnessed in my awake state the whole shift, right from this separated space, big team, to just surrendering and witnessing that change in perspective, and of, oh, everything is possible. So I guess a pendulum going from one side to the other. But I just want to say thank you. It was very beautiful, very timely marathon. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity, to be here. Yeah.
With that said, Denise, you really boiled it down to what our journey is about. It's about learning how to shift our perception.
Mhm.
Okay. So perceptions, as we've discussed in the several workshops that we had this month, is determined by our frame of reference. And our frame of reference, for the most part, until we actually take this into our hands, is not determined by ourselves. It's determined by some of the preconditioned and pre-programmed aspects of being a human. Okay, so like the way our neurology works, our neurotransmitters, the body, emotions, and mind. Some things are determined by conditioning, family, nation, ethnic background, and so forth. And some of it is determined by these ideals that we develop in the course of our lives. But neither of these are things that actually reflect the truth, the inner truth of ourselves. They all reflect external factors. And so the biggest challenge as humans is to experience this duality, okay, to experience something that we would probably call like an inner truth, and then being confronted with the outer truth, with the reality to this. So the trick is always to remember that both are there, and to see that it is us who has to set the priority. We have to make either this or that reality for ourselves. Okay, I have to prioritize. It's this with intentiveness is so instrumental. Yeah, and that's exactly when we discover these shadow parts in us, you know, where we don't really want to admit to ourselves that, oh, feeling like a victim or feeling like a making myself depend on others, that feeds my ego illusion. Okay, that if I live my life this way, then I can't make any mistakes or something along those lines. It sounds a little differently for all of us. So it always comes down to you asking yourself, all right, is what I am experiencing here what I want to experience? And then you have to look into where the no's or yeses come from. Okay, we have something like sympathy and antipathy that we talked about last month, which has to do with our nervous system. So there'll be a part in us that always resists to things that go against our comfort zone, or nobody wants to rock the boat, okay, things like that. So we have to investigate where these yeses and nos come from. Is that coming from me just sort of experiencing my own lack of courage to take my life into my hands, or is this coming from me living a too complex life, or is this coming from a place where I'm afraid of missing out or afraid of making mistakes? We have to name this for ourselves so that we know what we are up against. If you find out that you have this illusion, like say you're in a relationship and the relationship is really toxic, that you have this illusion, of an ideal of relationship, then you need to understand that what you're doing is going against your own truth. Okay, and this is why these things can be so draining, and why they can drive us into powerlessness, because the part here that we are resisting is not the relationship, is the reality of the relationship. And why are we resisting it? Because we don't want to let go of the ideal of it, or the idea or the fantasy of it. So it comes down to perception, to what we are willing, or basically, what we are choosing to align ourselves to. And yes, of course, we can align ourselves to the fantasy or to the ideal or some kind of version of perfect me. Okay, but if it's in contrast with the 3D reality, it's not going to work. It requires us to form a schism in us. It fragments us. All right, to be able to continue that way. And that's then what we as energetically aware people perceive. We feel this. We feel that something is severely draining in our life, makes us more and more, apathetic or fearful, or
Well, it sets up
experience
a
pain.
collapse at some point. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's actually some of the beauties of some of this work, is that even though you may not be ready to face certain things, maybe you're not quite sure it's even there, because there was a lot of hidden and lost aspects in some of the marathon sessions. But continuation into surrender, into grace work, into any type of higher consciousness work eventually forces that stuff forward, either in, like Jona said, in anxiety, or you have physical conditions, or you have a realization like, I can't do this anymore, and there's also those aha moments where you go, oh my gosh, I've been living in whatever for the last X amount of months, years, decades. And then it's there. Once you can feel it, once you can recognize it, then you can call it out. Then you can start working with it, like Jona just said. Yeah.
Who of you has an active problem with having insights, realizing, connecting with your inner truth, and then looking back and beating yourself up for not seeing this earlier or not doing anything about this earlier? Who of you has a problem with this?
Okay, we got all
I'm
of us.
kind of expecting all of your hands to go up.
Ours would both be up as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. All hands are up.
Or if you ever recognize where you'll actually realize what you're doing, whatever the defense mechanism is or whatever, you'll actually process it, and then you'll think about it, and then you'll recreate it. Maybe let's do that one.
Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
just beating yourselves up looking backwards,
Yeah,
that's
hands up.
something.
Yeah.
I don't know who, Cheryl, I think it was you this morning posting something in the current energies sharing thread. You thanked your true self to be able to see what you see today, even if you couldn't see it yesterday.
That was Heather.
Oh, that was Heather. Oh, Heather, you're here. This was such a profound impulse there that I want to thank you for, because that's what this comes down to. You know, we cannot judge ourselves based on how we perceived things yesterday. Painful and fragmenting, or pain and fragmentation sets in if you see it, if you feel it, and then act against it. Okay, there's also pain there before that already when you're unaware of it. But the moment you become aware of things and you're still denying them, that's when it gets really painful. Yeah, Heather, did you want to share? It was such a beautiful impulse this morning reading that.
I can try.
Maybe.
Without getting too far into unpacking the reasons why I said that, it happens to be just where I'm at. And I had a huge epiphany this morning in regards to where I'm at in my journey of self-healing. And it was really, really cool for me to not go into the self-beratement part of things and actively work on what I'm going to do to change what I've seen in my behaviors and in my attitude. And for me, it was just very overwhelming to understand that, hey, you know what? I didn't get this yesterday. I didn't understand it. I haven't understood it my whole entire life. I haven't understood what I came to the conclusion of. And it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. Yeah.
You can't understand what you can't understand. I mean, that's how simple that is, right?
And I love the term of being conscious about it and being conscious in making active steps towards changing what I don't like about myself. There's a huge difference between walking through this in an unconscious manner, and that's what I have been doing, thinking that I haven't been, but here I am.
Yeah, that's exactly it, Heather. That's exactly it. This is where you guys are all familiar with this quote, okay? Consciousness means to be aware of what you're understanding better now, and then you couldn't have understood it earlier. Because if we knew better, we would have done better, okay? There was this process of conscious making, okay, that needs to be embraced so that we can understand better, so that we can do better. So we have to agree to that. We have to agree to seeing truth so that we can change it, even if we don't know what that truth yet is. So it's this part where we always talk about embracing and going into your wondrous child, being curious. Okay, these are all things that once a person has experienced this a few times, that there can be these revelations, these epiphanies, these insights one day that put a whole different perspective on everything. Then you realize the magnitude of this so that we can begin to understand what our ego cannot know. That's so important that we internalize this. And ultimately, you know, where we all kind of dither a bit is where we then once we start this truth training, we start questioning ourselves. Okay, and this is where you have to be careful, because this statement here does not ask you to question yourself. It asks you to question your perceptions. It asks you to question your ego, not you. So that is basically then the instrumental part of this training, is to be willing to have new insights, be willing to change perspective, being willing to admit to oneself that yesterday's perception of myself, of the other, of the world, well, was limited, because all I could see yesterday was how I'm just sort of making examples here, how mean people are and how hostile the world is and how doomed we all are. And today, as I am more connected with myself, as I'm, you know, getting all these sort of inspirations, okay, that help me to see that there's more beyond that, even more beyond myself, my ego self, right? I'm starting to see that there is so much opportunity. All this goes hand in hand with this discussion of false hope and blind faith, okay? Ego creates false hope and blind faith. Why? Because ego does two things. It wants a solution to, it wants a fix for something that is perceived as uncomfortable or painful or whatever, and it will take anything that will fulfill that, or it will go into reasoning and trying to find a culprit. And when you are not part of this process, then your ego will go on autopilot and do this for you. And a lot of times the way this ends up then being is that we do both at the same time. We try to find the one fix. We're trying to hold on to our fantasy white knuckled. And at the same time, because energies don't lie, our true self knows, we're reasoning and the reason points back to us and we're accusing ourselves. It's this self-berating cycle that works on both ends. And it's extremely toxic, unhealthy. And the one thing that we need to let go, to boil this down, guys, is to be willing to accept the error of perception in us. We have to just be willing to see that our ego mind is often quite limited, and that the way I'm seeing it is not necessarily the way it is. And so it then becomes a practice, a discipline almost, to always assume that it might be just you. It might just be because you slept not enough hours, or you didn't drink enough water, or the neighbor just sort of said something upsetting to you or whatever, and then the world appears differently and I see myself differently. And it might just be that way, that the world is all bad and that all people are bad and that it's hostile, we're all doomed. But it's very hard to find evidence for that, because when you actually internalize your experience and you look out into the world and you see the beauty in nature, you see the light in other people, you see all that. This is very, very real. And yes, do we have problems in this world? Absolutely. But going into the one fixes it all, which is an endless and unrealistic undertaking, comes from an ideal or perfection or fantasy, or finding reason, conspiracy, and blaming others, doesn't fix anything. It doesn't change anything. The only thing that I am really in control of changing is shifting my perspective. Even if I just do this as a sport or discipline, because whenever I change my perspective, and you guys know this, most of you are empaths, that's exactly what you do when you tune into your own empathy. You're shifting your perspective to how the other person sees it. And when you love that other person, something in you begins to shift, because you begin to see the reality of it, okay? And in the end, there is no such thing as my reality is better or more important than yours. In the end, it's about recognizing that the reality is really in the how do you say this, in the eye of the beholder, and that I can change my reality by changing how I behold it, how I hold it in mind. And how can this be done without becoming sort of just a pure mental or intellectual construct? By practices such as what we just did during the Grace Manifestation Marathon. contemplation, meditation, transmissions, internalization, any minutes spent with the intention to internalize your perspective, your perception, and, saying, okay, this is how it looks like right now. Okay, I have moments where I literally say to myself, okay, the way I'm seeing this right now is that it's all pretty shitty. Okay, and then I say to myself, all right, let's just agree to that it's all shitty. Yeah, let's just agree to that. Let's not resist that. Okay, and then comes the other part of me that says, okay, so what you gonna do about it? Yeah, and then I talk to that part, and I'm like, well, this is the discernment training that I have. I'll say, well, there are certain aspects of that that I can't control, but there are some aspects of that that I can control, and that's then in me to choose which way I go. Do I align myself to all the stuff that I can't control? Obviously, that makes me feel doomed. It makes me feel like a victim. It makes me pessimistic. Or do I choose to align to the part of me that has options? And then I focus my energy around those options. And sometimes, and I don't know if you know this feeling, all I can see is like two options, like all or nothing. A lot of times, especially when the world looks shitty, it's like it's either all or it's either this or this. It's either everything gets resolved right now or it's the end of everything. Well, when I can only see two options, guys, when I can only see black and white, when I can only see all or nothing, what does that mean to you?
Ego, positionality. Yeah.
Proof right there. Why? Because even in our intellectual mind, we know that that's not true. It's irrational to think that way. Nothing is that way. Nothing is binary. I mean, if I have a donut in front of me and I eat the donut, the donut is gone. But from a larger energetic perspective, really not gone. It's inside my stomach and it's transforming, into like juices and nutrients and sugars and you know what I mean. I'm just being me here.
It's okay.
Yeah. Right. So the donut is still there, but it's transforming. I'm transforming it by metabolizing it. And that's what we do when we internalize. That's what we do when we live in consciousness. We are metabolizing and transforming. We're constantly transforming energies. And I mentioned this a few times. Every time we share something, every time we write something down, every time we take a conscious breath, every time we draw a picture, every time we cook a meal or even clean our house, we are transforming something. We're bringing an energy, for a lot of you, it's mental energies into a 3D action. Okay. And all you need to do is to be consequential about this. If you have sorrows or worries or pains that are cruising in your head, if you want to change that cycle, well, the first thing you need to understand is that you probably need to transform this somehow. And how do we transform these endlessly cruising thoughts in us? Well, if we have someone that we can share it with by talking about it, and that's why, talk therapy or just simply saying things out loud and speaking truth already transforms part of the energy of it. But if we don't have that, we can maybe write it down, write it to ourselves, like in form of a diary or something. And we can even address the diary to ourselves or to our true selves, for instance, how Heather did this morning, which in my experience intensifies this connection with myself. If I'm not writing to my ego self, that still has this like how I want things and how I want other people to see me. But when I'm writing to my true self, where it's absolutely clear that this is just about speaking truth and being real. Or I can draw a picture, or I can move out of the house that I'm currently in, or I can change my diet, or I can change my exercise routine, or I can, when it's emotional, work with the emotion and say, okay, what is the emotion that makes me perceive things in such a restricted way? Oh, it's fear. Oh, it's pain. Okay, to go into this fear and ask myself, say, okay, fear, you're there, you're trying to dominate the way I perceive things. Let's communicate. Let's exchange here. What is it that you're afraid of? Yeah, to go into the fear instead of trying to deny or cut off the emotion, to go in it and work with it. That's a form of transforming, or a way of transforming emotional energy. So there's many different ways how we can actively enter into this conscious transformation. But it has to come from inside. It has to come from the freedom that you can do something about this. You need to feel that freedom. And when you cannot feel that freedom, the freedom to heal, really, that I'm referring to, that means you are completely stuck in your ego. I can talk to your heart, I can talk to your brain, I can talk to your body, but there are some universal truths that all of you know. You all know that however you perceive things is not always the way it is, or at least that somebody else looking at the same thing can perceive it in a different way. And that means that if that is the case, there must be different options. There must be different ways. If there are different ways to look at things, then that means there must be different ways to resolve it as well. There must be ways to transform it. And just because I can't see that way right now, perhaps because I have unrealistic expectations or a fantasy or an ideal or whatever that I'm striving for, maybe I have to change that. For most of you, it is that. But just because I can't see it right now doesn't mean it's not there. It just means that my awareness right now, my perception is restricted, and that's where surrender comes in. That's where this quote here comes in. That's the reminder that just because I can't see it right now doesn't mean it's not there or not in me. It just means that something in me is blocking this right now. And so the focus then obviously needs to be, how can I unblock that? And this is where the big circle closes again. We realize that our journey is not a journey of acquiring things or getting better at things. Our journey is about letting go of things, letting go of ideas, ideals, fantasies, expectations, false perceptions. And once you realize this, guys, once you realize that your biggest enemy, or not enemy, but the biggest block that you have is your ego perception, it becomes almost like a non-brainer to develop a discipline, a daily discipline that helps you with letting go of all error perceptions. As the only thing that can ensure that you can be in truth. You don't have to wear red socks and you don't have to be spiritual. None of that is needed. Those are all external things. You just got to be willing to recognize that your perception at a given moment might be restricted. Even in a moment of excellence, guys, that's for many of the experienced hard warriors here still a problem sometimes. Then when we experience something really, really cool, right? And our ego goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it so happens to feed one of these fantasies or ideals. Okay. We got to be willing to surrender that as well. We got to be willing to, see that, oh yeah, that's just my ego liking it right now. Okay. Nothing wrong with that. But there is an addictive component to that, to always wanting, reality to match up with my fantasy. That for most people, guys, the healing process And this inner transformation is the battle of, your own ideals, or as Hawkins calls it, the idealization of the ego, the way you see yourself. Did you want to add anything to this, Jeff?
No, it was very nice. Just play it out. That was good.
Okay, then let's do the radio moderator kind of interplay here, for as long as nobody wants to chime in.
No, I really like how you described it.
How does it go for you?
As far as which, there was a lot there. What part are you talking
Well,
about?
the letting go of the error perception, or the ability to see error perceptions, and the willingness to let go.
I think the key thing is the willingness, and then also just being in that state, like you said, of not beating yourself up, but just accepting. We as humans have a lot of things that we've developed over the years that really helped us get through certain times, whether it be denial, suppression, repression, you name it. And by giving ourselves a break when stuff comes up, and learning how to get through the reactions first and begin to go into that reflective state where you can, like, I think what the big thing Jona said was talking to someone or writing it down, getting it out. So now it's real. Now you can do something with it is vital. And then, as most of us all know, is the big challenge for me, and I'm sure Jona agrees with many people, is just getting out of the performance that I have to do better, that I have to be better at this, or I have to be the best. It's more about looking at your life as creativeness every day, to see it as beauty. And then it becomes more about changing it bit by bit. There's no right or wrong way.
No, and Heather is pointing out that the inertia, of the ego, familiarity, so not even though there are so many different options, but we have this inertia, we all do, in us, that we call familiarity. We don't want to rock the boat, or it's just easier to cope, especially when we are low in energy already, even though the coping is often so unhealthy that it causes the drainage. It causes the drainage. So whenever I get into this place of feeling like a severe impasse, okay, I stop the whole machine, even if it's just for 24 hours. I stop whatever my mind is telling me, what my perception is, what my body is telling me. I stop everything. I like how you said this, Jeff, give myself a break, and say, wait a minute, I'm clearly stuck in something.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know what it is, and I'm not killing myself in the process of figuring it out. I'm like stopping the machine right now and surrender and give myself a break.
Take some time.
And see what happens. And when a person does that, when a person has training or practice in that, there comes an inner experience, and that is that things become so much lighter, so much easier. Then it's a trust that we develop in ourselves as a consequence.
I think it's just seeing the options that are possible that starts opening up. And you start to
yeah, that's always the biggest smasher in the head.
Black or white. This is
it's like,
great.
how come I didn't see this before?
Well, that's when I go into self-passion.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I would go into immediate.
I get so curious. I'm like, wow,
Nice.
if I couldn't see this before, I wonder what else is there that I'm not seeing.
When you said stop the machine, it reminded me of what came up in the marathon about how robotic we can be.
Yeah.
And so the machine is just designed to continue. Like I was thinking about when I used to work in an assembly plant. Like the machine just does what you tell it to do. It's a robot. You program it, off it goes, can do it all day until it breaks. And when I get stuck in my thinking that, well, when I don't even hear myself thinking, that's how strong the thinking is, then it's like I'm a robot. I'm a machine. I can do that for hours.
And that's actually a very good indicator, Cheryl, how to tell if we're in our ego. When we actually had this here a few times during the marathon, when we go into this autopilot. The autopilot is perceived as comfort because it's the pre-program that's running. But the problem with the pre-program is that it doesn't question anything. It doesn't actually is it actually aware of what it's doing? It's exactly what you just described. It's a dumb machine that was pre-programmed with some kind of mechanisms how to work, which is in our case of consciousness work here is something along those lines with perception, ideals, fantasy, and so forth. That is the pre-program, and
And it's
sometimes
like
also external things. Yeah,
it's like I text you a few minutes ago that the ego has this really cool way of not even allowing the ego to be seen by the ego, like, if that makes sense. And that feels like the robotic programming, like the robot doesn't know that it's programmed to do something, it just does
exactly.
it. So the
But it doesn't
ego
question
be
it.
like, yeah,
Yeah,
no, just
it
do
doesn't
that.
question it.
Yeah.
It can't question it because it doesn't have consciousness. So this is what we got to remind ourselves on. This is also the proof for all of you doubters and questioners out there that if we didn't have a consciousness, we couldn't question it. We couldn't witness it, but we can witness it. And when we go into this inner space, that's when we can witness ourselves. We can witness our ego. And that tells us another thing, namely that our conscience is a higher pay grade, that is much more powerful than our ego. So this aspect here about machine and functioning, this materialism, is something that you guys really need to understand, that ego is tied to 3D and therefore always reduces everything to its material. I often, and the functioning and the performing aspect of it is something that I've mentioned in other contexts as this darkness in us, because it disconnects us from the light. The light, it comes in through our consciousness, and that can transcend the 3D. So what we need to remind ourselves on is that we're not a robot, we're not an autopilot. And if we agree to it because it's more comfortable or less scary, well, then we are dominated by it. And that also means, that gets me riled up here, that we can be manipulated, that we can be controlled from the outside. And that's exactly what happens when we reduce ourselves to how the ego perceives us, as a machine, as a robot, as a thing that needs to function and that only has a certain lifespan. Then we are inevitably controlled by the external conditions, by the external world. And just for those of you here with etheric perception, also by other energies and entities. So that's why it's so important to understand that consciousness is not just some mental construct, guys. Ego perception is a mental construct, but consciousness is not.
Hi. Jona, hi. Oh. uh, I wanted to just share that listening to in this meeting now has reminded me of what I'm doing here, and it has reminded me of my original, not my original, but like always been there, right? Like commitment / devotion. I guess it was out of awareness for a little while, and that is like the commitment and the devotion to healing, right? To be more whole, to be in truth. I heard this morning someone say uh, that all of your skills, and which is abundance, is a form of abundance, right? All of your skills get used according to your level of consciousness, meaning that I feel like abundance is always available, but if we are running in autopilot, then we're just getting more of the same, right? And that might be level of fear, might be level, whatever level, right? But like you say, stopping and then remembering, right? Like to just surrender to grace, which brings a reminder of like self. Then I remember that what is this whole thing about, which I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's why this feels expansive. When we let go of this roboticness of our ego, when we let go of that, all of a sudden we feel an expansion. And sometimes it's physically painful a bit, because this happens with machines too. There's a certain rigidity that creeps in when we just work on autopilot, and this can literally make us rigid in our physical. So when you go into this inner heart space and you feel the expansion, it can actually be painful for a second, like this heart expansion pain that I mentioned sometimes. Annette, you've been trying different attempts to share. I see it.
Yeah, but I just want to say that the last session was really beautiful for me, and I have a shift, and I exactly don't know how it will affect me, but I know I have so much judgment and judge about my judgment, and I could feel a shift because I could feel that it was not necessary to judge myself, and it was more a feeling than I know it's stupid, but I could feel that it's not necessary, and
That's like that's a choice, Annette. What you're describing right now is a conscious choice. There's something in you told you that it is not necessary, and you chose not to. And then in that moment, your perception shifted.
yeah, perhaps, but it feels like a feeling that I just know it's not necessary.
Yeah.
But perhaps it's a choice. Yeah, it can
Well,
be.
it's the inner compass. It's a combination. You get a prompting from within, from your consciousness, that says, hey, Annette, you don't really have to judge. You have the freedom, you have the freedom to choose that. So you could also just let go of it,
Yeah,
and
but I also feel that it has something with connection to do. And I had a beautiful connection, and it feels quite different, and yeah.
But this is why we talk about discipline and practice and so forth. This is what Jeff mentioned in the beginning. It is this choice to go into this place, this inner connection, that facilitates consciousness. It facilitates that. Okay.
Yeah.
So all we have to do is to do it. We have to allocate the time to do it, or often it's not even that a matter of minutes. Sometimes it's just moments. That's why the first session focus was present moment awareness, to become completely aware of when we are aware and when we're not. And then we realize that each time we are aware, things shift. Okay. And then we get motivated to say, okay, here I'm feeling something like an inner connection. And that then, if I do this long enough, it facilitates my inner promptings, and that's then what we call inner guidance. So first we form something like a compass, okay, where we begin to feel more clearly if we are aware or asleep, if we're in this robotic mode, or if we are actually here, right? And then we begin to form more something like a roadmap. Then we begin to understand what it is that we need to let go, or what it is that we need to focus on instead. Okay, but that requires a little bit of patience, because what you just said, Annette, that it is these states where you feel more connected, where you feel this. So you have to train yourself how to get into these states.
Yeah.
Without that, everything that we talk about sounds like a foreign language. It's like and a mental construct. It is exactly what you just said. It's the inner experience of that state.
Yeah.
And there things start to happen. And I want to let you know specifically here for the marathon, Annette, because you mentioned something in the forum, because you had to work the first day for day and a half. You couldn't participate in the first sessions. And then when you came in, it felt really uncomfortable at first because,
Yeah.
you know, probably
Yeah.
because of judgment and because, oh, I feel left out, right? You
Yeah.
said,
And
you know,
yeah. Yeah.
mhm.
I
And
felt
even
so.
guilty. I mean, there was a lot onslaught of like ego stuff, right? That came
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
that, which is, by the way, why I mentioned in the beginning, especially here as heart warriors, see this as a whole entire field, not as a like an appointment,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
I have write it down. It was really good for me that you mentioned that because yeah.
Because what I saw your energy do within 6 hours or 10 hours or so, you caught up. Your energy went through what we had gone through in the course of a day and a half in a few hours. And that's why this was like maybe a little more uncomfortable, because for those of us who were actively in the sessions, well, we had the training already, right? We were going through it gradually, step by step, right?
Mm.
But the reason why I mentioned to you in the forum, say, well, you're not alone, you're not excluded, because
Right.
what happens when you actually choose to trust in that is
Mm.
that your energy catches up. You get there anyway. Do you know what I mean? That's what I'm trying to say. You'll arrive anyway. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just do it in a different way then. And the way the marathons are structured, they allow us enough sort of opportunity to practice this, to hold this, so that there's this progression felt. We feel that we're progressing. You
Mm.
progressed as well in light speed as soon as you started, on the last day when you started to participate.
Yeah.
Your energy went
Yeah.
through the exact same processes that we had gone through in 6 sessions prior.
Oh.
Just so you know, it's just like harder when you come from 0 to hero, right?
Yeah.
When you right, then it's like a jump in the cold water. But if you just and that's why it's hardware important that you realize this, that when we do marathons, you can do your own session at any time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
It's
if you
right.
have to
Yeah.
work, do your own session or take 5 minutes just to align yourself to the invocation.
Yeah.
And
I
then
have done
the,
that.
the
Yeah.
yeah, the whole field carries you through.
Yeah.
Okay,
But I could
that's
also feel that this time that I'm not in a hurry, because I often feel that
yeah.
I'm in a hurry, and it felt more peaceful
Yes, and
when
this was something actually in this marathon I noticed this, especially with those of you who often have these performance issues, right?
yeah,
Because the hurry
yeah,
comes from performance, right?
yeah, yeah,
Is that performance really wasn't in the foreground in this
no,
marathon. And
it felt
it was really nice because it's whether you understand the void or understand the master self is irrelevant. That's your ego mind.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
That's not the point. Those are descriptors of inner experiences. And the inner experience of that can only be experienced.
yeah,
You can, so you have to allow yourself to experience it, and this, you said judgment is one of the ways this can play out for a person, but it's I call this choice.
mm,
Okay, because
mm,
in this moment, all the stuff the judgment stuff that crept in for you
mm,
was all based on a feeling that you're missing out, or that
yeah,
you are
yeah,
not part of it, or that there's something going on that you are not,
yeah,
that you're not part of. And it is the moment, Annette, you decided to let that go, when you were naturally and organically part of it again. It was a
yeah,
choice.
yeah,
So my
yeah,
plea to all of you who struggle with inner judgment is to immediately replace judgment with choice. Judgment is autopilot, but choice
yeah, yeah,
is different. That comes out of your present moment awareness. That comes out of your consciousness.
yeah,
What am I choosing? You can
yeah,
judge yourself all day long and you'll never come to a resolution.
no,
Okay.
no,
But you can make a choice. And that
yeah,
brings instant resolution. Maybe not the big problem, okay, but the resolution for right now, why I'm so blocked or restricted right now, that immediately opens up. So well done, Annette, for coming regardless, you know, and for allowing yourself. This is a literally manifestation in action.
Yeah. Allowing is standing on my paper here. Yeah.
It's allowing the space for healing, allowing yourself that, and then actively engaging doesn't mean showing up on time to transmissions. It means showing up for yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. And you have the right to show up for yourself whenever you want to.
Yeah. It's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank all of you for sharing, guys. Thank you for being so phenomenal hard warriors. I know this journey sometimes can be taxing, and we experience all these ups and downs and roller coasters. But again, every time you come here, every time you share, even when you listen to this in the recording, something happens in you. And that is, you know, sort of really the goal, to increase this healing space for yourself and to help you or assist you in getting into this space with yourself, showing up for yourself and feeling your own consciousness, the experience of yourself. Thank you, everybody. With this, we're closing our Heart Warrior Meet. Wonderful reflections here. And I'm wishing you a great October. All the manifestation powers that are in here in October, regardless of the outer chaos. Okay, remember that. Remember that you're only dependent or controlled by outer things if you're not in control of your inner things. Okay. So remember that all you got to do is to allow that space with yourself, and then new options, new perspectives, new perceptions will occur or appear. Bye bye, everyone. Bye.